As I was moved from the beginning to the end of this film, and maybe it just hit me hard because we've been talking so much about faith lately. And this film, interestingly enough, was about people that underestimated God, and how if you underestimate God, He doesn't tend to show up. However, if you put your faith and trust in Him and you don't limit Him, it's amazing what He can accomplish. And in this particular movie, it was called Facing the Giants. And there were a lot of good things that I was able to pull out of this. And remember, there's this one particular scene where the team really is down. You know, they're a small team, never had a winning season. Their main talent just left for another school, and I can imagine being kind of a sports guy growing up. Played a lot of team sports, and I can imagine how they felt when their star player just left them, and they were really hoping to have a good year, and all they can see is, well, maybe we can win a couple. And I wonder how many times we approach our Christian walk that way. I wonder when we get up in the morning, if when we start our day, we're already defeated. I don't know about you, but that's how I feel sometimes. I feel like, oh well, if I can just make it till tomorrow. Instead of getting up with the anticipation of the great things God has the opportunity to do today, I get up and I've already conceded victory to the enemy. And that is no way to live. That is no way to survive. That is no way. That is not how Christ lived. That is not how He has called us to live. In fact, He has called us to live the exact opposite of that. And this movie was about changing their mind and changing their perspective and getting their eyes off their individuality and starting to work towards something that was greater. And this one scene, Philip, I think you would appreciate this scene. You have the biggest guy on the team, and I believe he was probably the linebacker on the defense, and he's the team captain. And he was the guy who had to really carry this team forward if they were gonna make it. He was the biggest, strongest guy. And they had this thing called the death crawl. Have you seen it, Phil? Where the guy gets on his you can't get on your knees, but he's on his hands and his feet, and he carries a team member on his back for so many yards. And you know, I don't know what he went, maybe 200, I'm guessing, maybe 210. And his teammate went about 160, and he puts this guy on his back. The coach says, "You think you can go 25 or 30 yards?" "Sure, no problem." He said, I can go 50 yards. He said, "All right, I want you to do it, but I want you to do it blindfolded." So the guy gets down, and he starts running or crawling with this guy on his back. And you know, they got a tight shot of the coach and the player. And the guy's crawling, and he said, Am I there yet? He says, "Don't worry about, are you there yet? Give me more. Give me more." And the coach is encouraging this player to just dig deeper than he had ever dug before. "Give me more," he keeps saying. "Come on, just 20 more steps. Just 20 more steps. You can do it. Just 20 more steps." And the guy says, "Am I at the 30 yet?" And the guy says, "Come on, give me some more. Have I made it to the 50 yet?" And the guy says, "Just give me a little more. Just a little bit more. Just keep pushing. Keep pushing." And the guy's digging, and he wants to quit. He said, "Don't quit. Keep going. Keep going." And finally he says, "Just give me a little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, now you can stop." And the guy says, "Did I make it to the 50? And he said, "Take your blindfold off." He said, "You're in the end zone." And I think our walk with the Lord is a lot like that, because when we are looking at things from a carnal perspective, when we're looking at the natural, when we're looking at all the distractions around us, and it's so easy to underachieve, because it's so easy to make excuses and to really limit our ability, or even limit God's ability through us by what we think we can accomplish. And here's a kid who if somebody had asked him, "Could you go 100 yards?" he would have said, "No way, it's impossible." But you don't know what you can do until you're really called upon to do it. And here's a kid that was able to take defeat and turn it into something that was victorious. And he didn't realize that he had it in him And what he didn't really realize is that God was willing to step in and use him if he would just get out of the way. And so many times I think that's us. So many times God wants to do big things with us in our lives. He wants to eliminate our debt, or he wants to get us a house. Philip, I know that when you were looking for a house, there were times you were thinking it's never going to happen. You remember those days, Phil? I mean, I remember being with Phil, and I remember watching him say, oh, it's never going to happen, and every little obstacle that came up was the next obstacle that was going to prevent this from happening. And having been down the road and knowing how good God is, I could sit back and say, you know what? You need to stop worrying because God's got it handled. Just relax, Phil. Trust God because he's got you taken care of. He wouldn't have given you, he wouldn't have had your grandmother give you the land and put the well and septic in if he hadn't already prepared a way for you to have a house there. And what happened in the 11th hour, who comes through? Jesus Christ. Right, Phil? He came through for you, and I bet you right now as you're living, it's been over a year, you're still married. We almost had a pool going on to see if that was going to last. But you're still married. You're a daddy now. And if you were to look back even 3 years ago and look, and somebody said to you, Phil, you're going to be married, have a mortgage, and 2 kids, I'm curious as to what you would have said. I don't think it was, boy, I'm looking forward to that day. In fact, I think it was like, no way, in a very warm place. It was something about the reaction I would get from Philip.
I would have added a little more.
It probably would have been a little bit more colorful, but we are on camera. But when God's involved and we let him, there's no end to what we can do. I want to read a story in the Bible. I was listening to Daniel today. Daniel's a great, just an awesome book. And there's a lot I would like to cover, but I'm going to try and keep it somewhat short, if at all possible. If you have time, go through Daniel. You're going to see some guys, and it's not like there's 50 or 60 people. I mean, you're talking about basically 3 or 4 guys that changed the course of a nation, and not only one nation, but many nations. You look at Daniel, and he was a leader not just for the conquering king, but the next guy that conquered that king. I mean, how many times do you know a guy of a already captured nation being ruler of the nation that captured him, and then still being a ruler of the next nation that captured that one? I mean, there's definitely a guy that had God's favor, don't you think? So here's Daniel. And Daniel had kind of a tough job. He had to deliver some pretty tough prophecies to an interpretation of dreams to these kings. One of which, take a chance or take some time and read chapter 4, because that's actually Nebuchadnezzar. That he actually wrote that chapter 4 of Daniel. And in 5, his son makes a great feast, and that's when the hand shows up on the wall and writes the inscription, and Daniel gives him the interpretation, which is again not very cheerful for him. And in that night the king dies. So now Daniel's on to ruler number 3. And in chapter 6, the new king is called Darius. And it says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom and 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and the princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. What was the thing that separated Daniel from all the other guys? An excellent spirit was in him. Was it because he was so unbelievably smart? Was it because he was so unbelievably talented? Well, did it have anything to do with his person at all? Or did it have to do that he had the Spirit of God? Now let me ask you a question. Part of the things about being a believer, or in the movement they call it today, being born again, what is it, you ask?